that every single one of you has a story. And what's even more impactful than that is that all of us are part of the greatest story ever to be told. And that excites me, because we might not have what some people call big fandangled testimonies, but we've all got a story that's between us and the Lord. And it's a privilege for me to share some of mine tonight. Can't obviously go through 50 odd years because you'd perhaps fall asleep, but I want to particularly give the glory to the Lord for what he's done in my life and yours. So basically, I was brought up in a tough white working class town south of Leicester. My family ancestrally is from up the north, and my father was a sergeant in the parachute regiment. So as you can well imagine, my early upbringing was very regimental. I loved my dad to bits, but he was very, very firm. And what you ate on the table, you ate, and you had to ask permission to leave the table. It was very, very much like that. But he was a rock solid figure in my life. When I was a young man, very young child, I was bewildered by the world. I was happy with looking at the stars, animals, playing. I had no idea about hate. I had no idea about difference. I just wanted to be accepted by everyone the same as all of us do. And after my dad left the forces, he still wanted to serve. So he joined the police. And that's why we moved down to the Leicestershire area. Now, in a tough white working class town, that's when my problems began. We weren't a Christian family, but we were into spiritualism. I had lots of uncles that were into all sorts of things like that. So I kind of grew up with an understanding there was something out there. I didn't fear death. It didn't scare me. And at a very young age, they said I had a gift in this spiritual world, which meant nothing to me at the time. But that was pretty much the only spiritual input we had. As soon as I went to school, things changed, because I was introduced to hate, not because I was different than anyone else, but because of my dad's uniform. Being a close-knit community, I got a kicking nearly every day because of that policeman's uniform. And I couldn't understand why. And it hurt me really bad. I asked my dad for help, and he said if you got involved too much, then it might make it worse. The teachers back in the 70s, I'm sure you can all remember some of your experiences at school. They didn't really seem to care. That's when they started to label me and give me badges of dyslexia and various other things. Well, the thing was, I was never dyslexic. If they'd have dealt with the bullying, my education would have been pretty much the same as everyone else's. But what the situation taught me was I eventually thought that I deserved to be beaten. It was normal. My dad always told me you're more of a man to walk away from a fight than to get involved in one. So I never retaliated in any way because I daren't. I was just terrified. By the age of 7, I remember my mother asking me what I wanted for breakfast, and nothing came out of my mouth, and I stopped speaking for at least 3 or 4 months. Took me to the doctors, but they just said it was a kind of a shock. And when I started to communicate again, the worst thing happened was I developed a really bad speech problem. So now not only was I getting bullying because of my father's job, I was getting bullied because I couldn't even say Christopher without it taking me several attempts. I gave up on school when I overheard the year head speak to my mum and dad and say, we don't think Chris has the intelligence to pass an exam. The only good thing I had in my life was I was talented at sport. Any sport I was naturally good at. And at the age of 12, I got assigned to Leicester City Football Club. And while I was on that football pitch, for those 80 odd minutes, I was everyone's hero. I was never bullied. And it kind of kept me going. But when I went back to school, it just carried on. So I'm already having mental health issues as a young child. There was no counselling available then. It was pretty much put up with it. I was desperately screaming out inside to be somebody because I didn't feel anybody. And the final straw for me was one day I came home from school. My dad went for a lie down. He wasn't very well. And there was this horrible noise upstairs, and Mum asked me to investigate, and I did. And I found my dad was having a massive heart attack. I didn't know what to do, what kid does, but I tried as much as I could to save my dad. And there came this moment when I just knew he was gone, and I just held on to him, and they almost had to prise him off me. When the funeral came, I was so proud of my dad because the police lined the streets, and then all the police came back to our house. And this is where I got a bit confused because they were all laughing and joking, telling jokes, drinking dad's whiskey. And being a young guy, I didn't understand it's their way of saying goodbye to a friend. I just thought, what are you laughing for? What's so funny? Why is celebrating anything? My dad's dead. He's only been in the ground a few hours. So I ran up into my bedroom and I locked myself in. And there was this rage from the deepest part of my being that just overwhelmed me, of anger, bitterness. I hated everything about life, hated everybody around me. It was the very opposite to what I really wanted. And I made a declaration of war on the world. I made a declaration of war on my bullies. I made a declaration of war on God, because I thought, if you do exist, how can you take away from me the only thing that I've ever loved? And I also decided I was never again going to love anybody, because when I loved anybody, when I let anyone in close, I'm going to lose them. So I kept everyone at arm's length. I had a massive gaping hole in my heart, and I didn't know how to fill it. I started to raid my mum's drinks cabinets, drugs cabinets, and sometimes I'd pass out, and I used to remember being very disappointed when I woke up because I was back with that pain again. And literally the pendulum had swung from the little scared kid into this monster that was rearing inside of me, who wanted revenge on my bullies. And I made a hit list of all these lads who'd made my life a misery, and one by one I got them back. It made me feel good for a short time. But always in the back of my head was, is this the right way? Is this the right way? But I could never seem to control this anger and rage. I was slowly being drawn into a dark world of occults, really going to town on things of the dead. It was like there was a dark cloak hanging around me, but in a strange way it felt safe, because no one could penetrate that, and only I used to know about it. And very many strange things happened. I didn't feel I belonged. So I started to look for things to belong to. My football career had come to an end, but I still went down to football, and that's where I met a bunch of lads who were angry like me. They dressed smart, they bought me drinks, gave me free drugs, and whenever there was a fight, they were always there. It felt like a band of brothers. To me, it kind of replaced that sense of belonging. And slowly, as I got immersed into the world of football hooliganism, I started to rub shoulders with many men that were politically motivated, full of anger, full of hate, full of disappointment, always going on about how this country has been sold out, how the government's against the working class, and blah, blah, blah. And I started to ask a lot of questions, because my granddad, he fought in the Second World War. He was captured by the Germans. So I knew what my granddad had gone through. But now I'm starting to rub shoulders with men that were saying that if Germany had won the Second World War, we wouldn't have an immigration issue. But how silly was I to get sucked into that? Because as a man with mental health issues, they were the very first people that Hitler killed his own. He killed the disabled, and he killed the mentally ill. But I didn't think of all that. The more I got involved in it, the more it made sense. I was even asking questions to local councillors about immigration, housing, St George's Day. Why can't we celebrate St George's Day and all this stuff? And the scary thing was, they always told me we can't talk about that because it's, you know, it's racist. It was as though you can't wave the flag without being branded a racist. And this is the big problem. We need to have these conversations. And I'm sure if I had people that gave me a more balanced view of the truth, then I wouldn't have carried on as much as I did. But I did. I joined the British National Party, and I didn't see any skinheads there. There were families, there were men who'd fought at Normandy. And I remember a talk by a guy who said he didn't know what he'd really fought for, looking at how the country was now. And I listened to this guy because he had medals on his chest, and I was sold on it. I even stood in an election, come second, which I was quite pleased with at the time. But all the time, the undercurrent in the British National Party was violence, was hatred. I started to realise quickly that I didn't know who wasn't my enemy. I can hand on heart say I never really had an issue with a person's skin colour. I had issues with those that were against what we and I believed. I eventually thought that Nick Griffin and the British National Party were too soft, and the only way to get back and get our country back was to mobilise and start taking action. This is where I chose to form my own group called British Resistance, where we started targeting gay Liberal Democrat councillors, church leaders, anyone who stood in our way. And how we would do that is, unfortunately, if we couldn't get at them, we'd scare their partners or make veiled threats. And it often worked. I didn't realise I was being watched by what I call the extreme far right. These are almost paramilitary, modern-day neo-Nazi groups which were really interested in what I was doing. At a hotel, I was approached by a woman who was a member of one of these groups, and I was seduced not by her, but by what she said. She said, "We want to roll out what you're doing nationwide because we think it's fantastic, but you must join us." But as I said, I had issues with that because of what my granddad did. I should have walked away, but I was so consumed with myself, with hate, that I chose to join one of Britain's most violent modern day neo-Nazi groups, which I'm not proud of. And how you get promotion within these groups is the more violence you do, because they're terrified of being infiltrated by the security forces. I decided that the only way I could ultimately prove was to attempt to take life. And I know what it's like to try and do that. I'm so glad right at that very moment, there was something in my head said, "What are you doing?" It was a little still voice. And I'm glad to say I never went through with it. But I took that person to that place where they visited almost the Reaper. And it gave me a sense of power. It gave me a sense of control. But I was in denial because I realised very much I was out of control. I'm now taking every drug there is going. The arrests were coming. Excuse me. And something quite amazing happened, because instead of them sending me to jail, they started to put me in top mental security units. The longest I served was 18 months, being locked up, being forced their drugs, where they tried to rehabilitate me and get me under control. Every time I got into trouble, I used to use that mental health card to get out of it, and it worked. They gave me a free bed, free food, access to a gym, and I could hide there. But I was just denying myself and what was going off. We even plotted to kidnap Tony Blair's children. This was an active plan. This is where we came to the attention of the security forces, and we didn't realise they were watching everything we were doing. And then this is where I'm sure that God, I know he's always had his hand on my life, even though I still did everything that I did. I still believe that if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for God being there, I definitely wouldn't be here now. And it was another four-letter word through my son called love that he first started to talk to me. Because if you remember earlier, I said that I rejected love. I remember one night, my son, who was 10 at the time, he was crying so hard. I've never seen a child cry like he did. He couldn't get his breath. And any normal father would pick their son up and say, "Come here, son, what's the matter?" And I pointed at my 10-year-old son and I said, "How dare you cry in front of me like a girl? If you're going to cry like a girl, run off and hide under your mum's skirt. But I don't ever want to see you cry like that. When have you ever seen me cry?" I'm bullying my own son now. This is the kid who himself was bullied. I'm now bullying my own son. And he turned around, he said one sentence, and this sentence cut through me to the core of my soul. Still gets me now. He said, "Daddy just loved me." That's all he said, "Daddy just loved me." And in that moment, I saw my innocent son, and I saw myself, and I thought, I can't carry on like this anymore. And I didn't know how to get out of these gangs. They came looking for me to take me out when I left them. But I ended up in the middle of a street surrounded by armed police, and I begged them to help me. I begged them to kill me. And they put me away again. But this time it was different. The government had a task force of guys, men, that were prepared to come alongside and mentor me. And what do you give a neo-Nazi guy? You give him an Asian man. And I looked at him and he looked at me and I thought, how's this going to work? But that man showed me love, like my son did, unconditional love. He knew what I'd done. And I realised very quickly he bled the same as me. He loved football the same as me, and he was a good guy. And I kind of grew to love him. He worked with me for 2 years, and I was now drug-free, alcohol-free, gang-free, but this gaping hole was still there. And I was battling to keep myself above waters with suicidal thoughts. And I remember taking a rope one day to a tree. And I believe this was the first time I had an experience of a real God, because it was a beautiful spring day, and there was this terrific wind that knocked me to my feet. Something passed through me that day, and I cried, and I threw that rope away, and I went home. And then a guy called Paul Gasky is his name. He was another one of my mentors, and he was a Christian man, and he invited me to a men's Christian curry night. And I thought, oh, that sounds all right. I don't mind a bolter. They can keep Jesus, and I'll have my bolter. Thank you very much. So I went to this curry night, and there was a guy from Christian Vision for Men called Carl Beach who spoke about forgiveness. And it broke me. It spoke so much into me. It was as though he knew everything about me, and he was talking about me. And I went up to Carl. I said, Carl, how can God ever forgive me for what I've done? And he said, well, have you asked? And he walked off. He left me with it, have you asked? And I went home, and I couldn't sleep. And there was a battle going on between what I can only describe as good and evil. 1 minute, this little voice is saying, you're better off dead. You don't deserve anything like salvation for what you've done. And then there was another still voice saying, Chris, give this to me. Let me in. And I now know who that voice was. I don't know why, but the following day, when I got up, I had a couple of hours sleep. I was standing outside it was thundering down with rain. I'm soaking. I'm standing outside a Baptist church in the middle of Leicestershire thinking, it's 7 o'clock. Why am I standing here? But I had this urge to get to a church. And I was about to walk off thinking, no, I do need psychiatric help for standing outside a church at 7 in the morning. And this little old lady says, why don't you come back for a cup of tea? We've got a coffee morning. And I said, I'll tell you what, I will. I went back to that church. I grabbed my cup of tea, and I went and sat in the church hall where there was no one there. And I couldn't stop crying. But these were tears of joy and hope. And I didn't come out with any long speech. I just looked in the air and said, God, if you're real, help me. I didn't know where else to go. I'd come to the end of my tether. If you're real, help me. Within an instance of me asking, I felt a physical snapping inside my soul, a release. I was euphoric. I was running around the church like I'd scored the winning goal in a World Cup final. I ran home. I threw all my medication in the bin, which I don't advise anyone to do, and I've never needed an antipsychotic drug since. That morning, the Lord, when I shouted to him, he heard my call, and he came in and he released me from all that dark occultic hate that I'd festered for all those years, and he set me free. During the period after that, and God's got a great sense of humour, the very first man I ever spoke to Jesus about was a black man, and he came to the Lord. And then the next man I spoke to was a gay man, and he came to the Lord. And it was as though God was laughing because he's saying, everyone you hated, I'm putting in your path. And he did, one by one. It was incredible. And then the relationships with my family were healed. The hate had gone. The government then asked me to get involved in helping them formulate a plan of attack against hate and racism in this country. So a lad who didn't pass his schooling, who was classed as dyslexic, gets invited down to the Houses of Parliament to give a lecture to the MPs of the government to give my perspective. It's like only God can do these things. And then he was helping me go to schools and colleges, universities to do lectures where I was fortunate to give my testimony about what Jesus had done in my life. And now, the man that I am now, I have a ministry called Extreme Men, where we go into churches and gee the guys up and tell them they've all got a story and to not be afraid to speak to men about Jesus. I'm in the leadership of my church. The Lord's blessed me with Rosa, one of the best things that happened, because he still knew that I needed a lot of guidance. So thank you, Rosa. And life has just been utterly amazing and fantastic. And I suppose everyone, like I said at the beginning, I suppose everybody is perhaps sitting there thinking, oh, wow, fantastic. But you've all got a story. Every single one of you in this room tonight has a story that is God's story, that is equally as important as anyone else's story. And especially at this time that we're all facing, the world is full of fear. It's full of panic. I can't think of a greater time when the church needs to stand up and be the men and women it's been called to be in a dark times, to shine. The Lord says we're to be cities on a hill. He wants to show us off to the world, and we can lead by example to our neighbours, to our friends, to our work colleagues. And the beauty of things like Zoom and the internet, because it's not all bad, we've got great opportunities to share more than ever a message of hope. And I suppose that's where I am now. The man that was once full of hatred, I thank the Lord that he's turned my heart of stone into one of flesh, that he's given me compassion for the very people I used to hate. And I just think it's an awesome privilege that he calls us his ambassadors. And when you realise what an ambassador does, you realise the full intensity of what you and I have been called with. That's you, the man or the woman who thinks you've not got much to say. The Lord says different. The Lord says, I paid for you at a high cost, at a high price, and all I want you guys to do is shine. So as Graham Kendrick once said, all we got to do is shine, Jesus, shine. So I don't want to rattle on anymore, but I give all that glory to God. And I thank you all for listening. I hope there's something in what I've said tonight that's encouraged you. And what an awesome God we've got. So thank you very much, guys.